Okay, so in Exodus 21, we go from the Ten Commandments, right? And in our heads, that seems to be like a solitary event. What I want you to see here is what was the paragraph or the portion just before you got into Exodus 21? What did it state?
The law.
The end of 20. What does he stop and say?
Not to make gods.
So he reiterates that.
To sacrifice burnt offering.
The knots and the dews.
Offering.
Idols and altars.
right.
Yeah, but these are his rulings. This is the way you do things for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Way to make altars and.
Right, so here he goes in, he goes, these are the 10, the Decalogue, and that's where we kind of stop. But he carries on speaking as if he goes, all right, well, now we've got the baseline, now I want to talk to you about this is how you're going to make an altar, this is how you're going to get this done. And he continues the conversation. We need to separate the idea that the 10 Commandments were only 10 words and that's the end of it. Okay, this is now the continuation thereof. The 10 Commandments is a summary of a covenant reality. Yeah? 2 copies. 1 tablet and 1 tablet. 5 things on each side. I have a copy, you have a copy, we sign copies, you take it to put it in your safe place, I take it and put it in my safe place. That's how it worked. God goes, take both copies and stick them in the Ark of the Covenant, which has not yet been built. So we're going to put our safe places are going to become both of our safe place, which is going to get to the point of the tabernacle. Right. So he goes in, let's see what other regulations or rulings he comes into. This is part of a parasha that they would call Mishpatim, which is basically rulings, okay? Now, when you read through a list of instructions, in the back of your mind, I want you to think, why would a loving father give me this instruction? Do not get stuck on this idea of, oh, God gave us those instructions then, as if it was some sort of mistake and now he sets me free from them on the other side. All right, you are going to deal with people that have this old covenant, new covenant reality to the point where they go, one of the first things people will ask you if you say you're Torah observant and you believe that you should keep the Torah, they go, should we start stoning our children?
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Only the rebellious ones though.
But what you should hear is they're implying in the question, is God wrong for telling you to do that in the first place?
No.
You're not challenging me on my understanding. You're actually challenging God on the instruction.
Yeah, and he is cruel.
Right. So what you're implying is that God was at fault for making the instruction in the first place, and now you're judging me because I say we have to keep it. Never mind asking the actual questions about when God said there is a stoning that has to take place. Why would he say that?
Yeah.
Never mind what is the procedure that they have to go through, and does it apply today? How can it? If even under Roman rule, were the Jews allowed to execute anybody?
No.
No. So even if you were wanting to keep that mitzvah, you cannot simply because, number one, you don't have a Sanhedrin. Number two, you don't have that 2 or 3 witness with the court system they have, and simple government law will not allow you to.
No.
Right, but they don't ask those questions. They simply imply, do we have to do this now because we're under the old covenant? And again, the taste that it leaves in your mouth is, God was wrong. He's not. Right? So when we look at these instructions, we're looking back. Egyptian rule. This is the way the Egyptians do it. We're looking forward. This could be where the Canaanites did it. And we're looking in the middle. How does this sanctify God in the middle of every single instruction? Because it tells you more about Him than anything else. Okay? Don't get lost just in the details. See how it reflects. So if we go Exodus 1 or 21, verse 1. These are the rulings you are to present to them. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, he is to work 6 years, but the 7th he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. Pause. Because of this, does God allow slavery?
No.
I don't know.
Right, so we will have people out there that will say, your God advocates for slavery, therefore, how can you worship a God that says it's okay to have a slave? Okay, now this is where the interesting thing comes in. When he says slave here, the word in Hebrew is servant. Remember, he just pulled them out of slavery, and he will instruct them in various different places that when you get someone to come and work in your home, you treat them basically as family. Your food becomes their food. There is no separation between it. When you rest on Shabbat, they rest on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Right? And this, compared to an Egyptian mindset, is so completely foreign. They're going, okay, what do you mean? So when he comes in, he's not a slave but a servant. He's being paid for his things. He's been purchased with a price. And he's also dealing with a corrupt system. So let me put it to you this way. There is an idea where when we discuss Torah, you might hear me say, it is permitted, not instructed.
Yeah.
So divorce. God doesn't run around saying you have to divorce that one, you have to divorce that one. He says you were allowed to leave the marriage into this is the case. He's not saying you have to divorce, he says you can divorce. There's a difference. Right? So when we're dealing with a corrupt society, he's going to go, okay, this is what we're going to deal with. Again, Abraham, Hagar. What happens with Rachel and Leah? Right? And in the midst of a broken world, he tries to bring truth in a broken system, and he tries to help people understand his character and his instructions. Okay, you see that a lot when we get to Corinthians and Romans and Ephesians and so on, where you're dealing with people that have maybe 3 different types of marriages. Under Roman law, you become a believer, and then you go, okay, Paul, now what? Which one's my wife? Because all 3 are actually my wife. Where does God's instruction start here, and where does it end? And where does that leave me with these other with these women? And now we've got to go, okay, well, what is Father's heart? How are we supposed to deal with this? And let's work through that. Okay. So he goes in, he says he's to work 6 years, but in the 7th he's to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. Okay, you're setting him free every cycle of 7. So 7th year becomes what we call the Shemitah, sabbatical year. This is important to God because as the Sabbath is, he goes every 7 years, you will let them go. So when Sabbath, in the back of your mind, I want you to hear this is a time of freedom. If he came single, he is to leave single. If he was married when he came, his wife is to go with him when he leaves. But if his master gave him a wife and she bore him sons or daughters, then the wife and the children will belong to their master, and he will leave by himself. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, so that I don't want to go free, then his master is to bring him before God, and there at the door, or doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear with an awl, and the man will be his slave for life. Okay, again, Ebed here, servant. Think about what this guy's giving up.
He's leaving his wife and his children behind, and he's got to go away now.
Well, if he leaves, but if he chooses that he loves his master, what does he sacrifice? His freedom. Now, I want this to be in the back of your mind because Paul will reference this in many of his letters. He will say, I'm a bond servant to Christ. This is what this is called, a bond servant. When Paul says, I love my master to the point that I'm willing to wear his mark, the doorpost is the place where it was made, and I surrender my entire freedom to be with him. That all summarized in his intro, I, Paul, a bondservant of Christ. he goes, I don't want to be free of this. I love him so much that I'm willing to sacrifice everything. I have nothing left. My desire is him and him alone. I want to think about that. God looks at him and he goes, it's okay, I'm going to set you free. He goes, no. How can I live without you? How can I be apart from you? There's no way I'm going to do this. This is a much... It's not just a life of surrender, but it's a heart condition that kind of points us back to when we kind of make this reality about us in the midst of what can God give me? But instead of my love for Him being the greatest motivator for whatever I do thereafter once I've received salvation. What happened at the doorpost, or what leads me to the doorpost, is love. What keeps me in the house is love. I want the best for my master's household. And I will serve him for that reality. Okay, and when we look at this is again kind of interesting, because it's kind of like almost like a reverse Passover. The Passover doorframe picture stands firm, right? So the blood on the doorpost is what set me free. So now at a doorpost, I'm giving up my freedom so that I can stay in the house. Yeah? But this is now no longer I'm stuck in Egypt. This is now I'm entering my master's house and here I stay. Right? This is a place of safety. Secondly, the blood on the doorpost is a sign. Here an earring becomes a sign. What I find interesting about that is it was an earring that made me an Egyptian slave. Except now my love for my master is something that I wear not in shame or not as part of that identity, but I am now a slave to righteousness. This is how Paul will also refer to himself. And now this becomes, again, the heart condition of the matter is so much more than I've given up my freedom, I've surrendered my life, I'm a living sacrifice, I'm a slave to righteousness, I belong to him and no one else. And he's focused on that reality. Okay? So he takes this and he goes, this is who I am. Listen to verse 5 again. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, my children, I don't want to go free. I don't want to go free. Verse 7 says, if a man sells his daughter as a servant or slave, she is not to go free like the men slaves. If her master married her, he decides she no longer pleases him, then he is to allow her to be redeemed. He is not allowed to sell her to a foreign people because he has treated her unfairly. If he has her marry his son, then he is to treat her like a daughter. If he marries another wife, he is not to reduce food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these three things, she is to be given her freedom without having to pay anything. Now this again is an interesting thing. You bring someone into your household, and if you find that she no longer pleases you, and this becomes up for rabbinic interpretation, what does it mean when you find her displeasing? Well, remember...
You change your mind all the time, can't you?
Right. Remember the discussion about divorce between Hillel and Shammai? Mm-hmm. When we talk about Hillel, he would say, well, if she burns the soup, if she, whatever the scenario is, for whatever reason, if I find her displeasing, she must go. Shammai says, only on the grounds of sexual immorality does she go. Right? And we understand that Yeshua settles that debate in his discussions. But here we come up to this. Again, I want you to see the heart condition of the guy who buys her. He looks at her and then he goes, I don't like her anymore.
Yeah.
You have to allow her to be redeemed.
Yeah.
That in this culture at that time is You could do whatever you want with her. Hagar, you can send her off to die. You could do whatever you like. This is not that reality. He goes, well, if you're not allowed to sell her to a foreign person or send her off to someone that is not in covenant, that are going to treat her harshly because you don't like her. Your ends are now responsible for that person, and you will treat her fairly. You will treat her justly. Can you hear the Father's heart in us? Broken cycle, this is how you will behave. Then he goes into something interesting. He goes, if he marries another wife, he's not to do these three things: reduce food, clothing, or marital rights. If I deny her any of these, what is she allowed to do?
Leaving.
Would you call that a divorce?
Yeah.
So when we discuss divorce, or as we have, when we look at those things, if you had to have a discussion with someone and say, I'm in a really bad situation, my marriage has fallen apart. If someone walked up to you and they said they don't feed me anymore, would you call that abusive?
Yeah.
What happens if he refuses to clothe me? I have to wear rags, or whatever the scenario is. Abusive?
Yes.
Right. Unfortunately, people run around and they say, unless a person is involved in some sort of immorality, you're not allowed to leave. That's not what Torah teaches here. Torah teaches that if I am abusive to my spouse, even if, and the context is clear, even if she's a second wife, how much more so for any wife? I'm not allowed to worry. I have to clothe you, I have to feed you, and marital rights. I don't know, food, clothing, and protection probably would have been most people's top three, but now all of a sudden this comes in. Now we're going to ask ourselves a question. So if there is no intimacy, then what? Is she allowed to leave? It's a simple answer. If I don't clothe you, can you leave? Yes. If I don't feed you, can you leave? Yes. If there's no intimacy, can you leave? Yes.
It's a big thing on old people, eh?
Remember,
No, I'm being serious. I'm the old people, I represent them.
if it is part of, there's a point in marriage where you get through this place where we got to go, okay, hang on a second. I think it's in Corinthians, and that he'll go into detail about it. Your body's not your own. And you have to understand that it's not in the fine print, but it's kind of a norm. Right? And if that's part of the norm that develops intimacy, and yes, I understand that as men sometimes view it versus the way women sometimes view it, in the midst of it, when a marriage is operating the right way, that becomes natural for both parties. When it's not, when it becomes more focused on self, that's when it suffers. So the questions then you have to start to ask is different. And again, I acknowledge when I come into this marriage that my body is not my own. If we make, and this is what we do, if we make discipleship more about ourselves than about God, we're running at the risk of creating, let me just say, picking and choosing what we want to become instead of actually following the instruction. Right. If I walk into a marriage and I'm saying, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm not going to do, and there's neither boo or bar, that you can't say this, you can't do that, you can't tell me what to do. You've left selflessness at the door. And remember, marriages are supposed to be a depiction of the intimacy that God craves from us.
Yeah.
So if we are supposed to operate like, okay, let's put it in this way. Women are easier for an identification in this. Ladies are supposed to operate as the bride of Christ, correct? Okay, so that gives the men the opportunity to act like who?
Like Jesus.
Right. I have to,
What did you say?
like Jesus.
I thought you said Caesar. And I'm thinking like, what?
No, we left that coin outside.
Yeah.
So if we get to the place of men have to understand that as we lead, we have to reflect Christ, that becomes our responsibility. So when as a spouse on either side, you should be constantly evaluating your responses to each other in line with your function, spiritually speaking. Here's a simple test. Your husband comes in the door, how do you greet him? Would you greet him as if Yeshua just walked through the door, yes or no?
Well, you should.
You should.
Yeah.
But instead you get, how many times have I asked you to wash your feet?
Exactly. And
Are you coming across from Galilee? Oh,
and this is but this is exactly my point. We've lost the point of focus, and the focus is marriage is about reflection of the bride of Christ with Christ.
Sure.
Now, as a husband, when I walk through that door, am I going to walk in and reflect Yeshua?
Your husband has arrived.
Yes, I've been walking on the water all day. I'm hungry. You've got to understand your love is not focused on, I walk into the door, therefore you will now serve me. No, I've walked in the door, therefore it's now my opportunity to serve.
Yeah.
Where are my kids? Where is my wife? Do I show her affection? What do you need from me? How do you do it? And again, it's completely contrary to the way we've been raised.
Yeah.
And we have to catch ourselves in the midst of it, because if I'm called to be like Christ, then I will be. But I have to make sure that in that intimate relationship, I need to understand that function and that role to the point that if I lift up my wife and love her the way Christ loves the church, would it not be easier for her to submit to me and to love me the way it becomes reflective?
She will respond. She
And-
should respond.
And that's
I
exactly
would
it.
give her a period of grace because she has to be softened again.
Yes.
But she will respond and not react.
And that's exactly that natural thing. And if you, as a lady, respect, because that's a big thing for men, hey?
Yeah.
Respect and submit, and that's not my instruction, that's God's instruction, to that reality, knowing that this is someone who surrendered to God, then all of a sudden, once that need is met in his life, he will respond in kind. I want you to think about it. Some of us have been married a little bit longer than others, but there have been moments where you have gotten that wrong, and what has been the natural brokenness response? If I get that wrong, basic model, what happens is that relationship starts to suffer. But if I get it right,
The hardest thing is for you getting it right and then not getting it.
Yep.
Let alone getting it right. That is what costs.
but this is,
That's the cost you have to pay.
but we have to
And
again,
that's what God asks you sometimes, that this is what I want you to carry.
yep,
Because the word says that many a person has been won over by the way the wife behaves.
yep.
So
See, you
we
can.
do have the tools, but it's got to cost you.
Yeah, because you're not going to want to. Many of the actions that we face, or the many things that we face, we get to the place of I don't feel like it, I don't want to, I.
Yes. And you know why we do that? Because I is broken.
Absolutely.
That's why we can't, I can lie down.
Which is why we have to get to that place of it's not about me, it's actually about God, and because it's that reality, I have to focus on what He wants.
Yeah.
Different. That if I take these three things away from someone, and the sad reality is you will notice that in modern day society, those three things become control.
Yes.
You won't do this, therefore you won't get that. You won't do that, then you won't get this. And then it becomes a controlling monopoly. God says you don't do that, they walk.
Yeah.
This is marriage, you don't play games.
Yep.
Don't lose sight of what I am instituting because you're hard-hearted. Different view, eh? He says, okay. So she gets to go. Verse 12. Whoever attacks a person.
Get.
Yes, a divorce. Whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death. Again, loving Father, what is the instruction? What is the heart behind it? If this person is violent and wants to kill people, do we allow him to keep on doing it? Not in God's congregation, no. If it was not premeditated but an act of God, then I will designate for you a place where you can flee. But if someone willfully kills another after deliberate planning, you are to take him even from my altar and put him to death. Even if he's there at that point crying out, your consequence will still come. And this is one of those realities. You can make teshuvah, but death, wages of sin, is death. It doesn't take away the consequence of sin. That's like Eve taking the apple, biting it, and then going, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it. Death still entered. The fall still happened. Now it's a case of, how do I get you back home? And it's that eternal reality that we focus on. But sometimes when you make a mistake in this, you can be sorry, but there's still consequence of that. Okay? That makes sense? All right, so God also makes a distinction here between manslaughter and premeditated murder. Whoever attacks his father or mother must be put to death.
That's a crazy one nowadays, isn't it?
It's one of those realities where we don't even think about.
Oh. There's so many parents have been so evil to their children, you eventually just snap.
Yep.
Really, I read that when it was hard.
Whoever kidnaps someone must be put to death, regardless of whether he has already sold him or the person is still found in his possession.
Yeah.
Tell me about...
That would be a nice one for nowadays, eh?
Think about it. You have all of these cartels and this kidnapping things that are going on, and we'll put you up for ransom. What happens if you try to do it once, you get caught? It doesn't matter whether you have the person or not. You're guilty. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Again, what is Father's heart? He doesn't issue a death penalty lightly. This is the loving Creator God who created you in His image for a relationship. The last thing He wants from you is sin and death. So if you kidnap someone, why does He say that's it?
Because it's wrong.
Not only that.
Steal other people.
Yeah.
I think it's not only that, I think it's because you're harming one of his
What he
children.
created.
You're harming his creation.
You're taking an image of Him.
If I consider that person's life, that person's loved ones, that person's reality, when I take you for myself and I sell you off for a profit.
No, you don't.
He says, you are not looking at anything that he was made in my image or she was made in my image, and you didn't think twice because all you wanted is money.
So what happened to Joseph? Hello. They didn't apply this.
He had all the authority to be able to, and this is why he kept on
That's
coming
why
back.
it was-
Please forgive us. Once our Father's done, please
Yeah.
forgive us, please forgive us. And he, thankfully, Joseph recognized where the plan came from. Okay? Verse 17, whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death.
Yeah. Even worse.
So now it's violence or cursing against.
It doesn't even say killing them, just
No.
attacking them and cursing them.
You won't have that. Remember, it's the opposite of honor your father and your mother, and you will live. Now, does that verse now change a little bit now when you hear the repercussions of not?
Yeah.
Now, can you know, God forbid any parent has to go through this. But the point of taking a child to the Sanhedrin with witnesses,
Yeah.
at that point, knowing the consequence, I think it would break a lot of people. There's no leeway there. Once the Sanhedrin has given a verdict, if you do not follow through with that verdict, you're the one who has to take the verdict upon yourself. Oh, so you didn't want to issue the death penalty, therefore off you go. Now it's your turn. What you giggling about?
I'm laughing because I must be the Sanhedrin for the foster children. They get away with nothing.
There's a difference between discipline and taking them off to some place. Okay. Verse 18, it says, if two people fight and one hits the other
Yeah.
with a stone or with a fist, and the injured party doesn't die but is confined to his bed, then if he recovers enough to be able to walk around outside, even with a cane, the attacker will be free from liability, except to compensate him for his loss of time and take responsibility for his care until his recovery is complete. It's an interesting one. In the heat of a moment, you hit someone, and then you're the one who has to now take responsibility for him. You did this. Yeah, but he did this, she did this, he did that. And what happens if it takes 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks? All of a sudden, it's no longer just a heat of a moment. It's frustration now. I have to care for, I have to pay for, I have to look after until I see you back on your feet. That's a much better process than, oh, okay, listen, I'll sign a
Yeah, sue me.
I'll give you some money, or oh, you grievous bodily harm me, we're going to put a restraining order between you two because you can't control yourself. This teaches you to take responsibility. You have to look at that guy's wound. You might even have to change it. Change the dressing, fix him up, make sure he's got,
Yes, community service, that kind of thing as opposed, works for your stuff.
Yeah.
You're definitely going to think twice
Yeah.
doing that to the next person.
Yep.
And well, you've got time to change, haven't you?
Next one. If a person beats his male or female slave with a stick so severely that he dies, he is to be punished. Except if the slave lives for a day or two, he is not to be punished, since his slave is his property. Now you stop and you're going to go, okay, where's Father's heart in that? I want you to put yourself in their shoes coming out of Egypt. Remember, this is still Sinai. They were the ones that were beaten. So what is their interpretation of this? I'm sitting here, I'm working for you, you bring your frustrations out onto another person. What happens if you're angry because someone did something wrong, you come out there, your slave did something, you beat them with a stick. And then you have to look at that person for the next 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, and they get better. And you have to look at that person in the eyes. Month 2, month 3. Would you start to realize that you were no better than the Egyptian who did that? Would you start to realize that you might be the problem? Would God be teaching you a lesson through that? It's easy for me to hit something and then run away. It's different when I have to look at that person in the face the next day and the next day. And we stop and we go, but we have to protect the person. Absolutely, there is that process. But the simple reality is God's not going to change your heart condition until you see who you are and what you're capable of. When you looked in the mirror and finally realized that you were the problem, that's when you started to pray for change. If He doesn't allow you to give you that moment or that mirror, that process, you're never going to change. You're always going to justify why you're right, because you never ever have to sit with a consequence. And the consequence in this case is a person staring at you going, why did you do that to me? What answer will you give? What account will you give for your response? You see, we will continually justify our actions until we realize that sometimes our actions have no justification. The issue is me. If people are fighting with each other and happen to hurt a pregnant woman so badly that her unborn child dies, then even if no other harm follows, he must be fined. He must pay the amount set by the woman's husband and confirmed by the judges. But if any harm follows, then you are to give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. So this becomes obviously misquoted. Life for life. You killed someone, I kill you. Okay, you kill them, and another person goes, oh, but you killed someone I love, so now I killed you. This is not retribution. What is eye for eye, hand for hand, what wound for wound? What does it actually mean?
Equal, a just consequence.
Right, it's the scale. Right? If you hurt my hand, it doesn't mean that now I have to come over there and hurt your hand. It means you have to pay the consequences of a hurt hand. If you punch me and I pull out an axe, you broke my nail, I'm going to chop off your hand. Is that fair?
No.
But that's what we do. We try to bring up the retribution. You will pay for your sins, and it's always over the top. God says, no. Listen, if you get burned, then you've got to pay to cover a burn. If you hurt your hand, now think about it, life for life. In that scenario, if I do something, God forbid, that's going to cost the life of your servant, I have to buy another servant to replace that life. So you then can, or I become the replacement for that life. I'm the one who works the field. I'm the one that takes that place. This isn't a scenario, remember, and again, life for life is one of those, if it's a murder problem, there's a stoning involved. But we're going through the process here of understand that there has to be a just scale. If it is accidental, how do we weigh it? If it is on purpose, how do we weigh it? How do I make sure that there is the right amount of payment and retribution as according to God's standards, not my own? And again, we focus so much on what we would want to get back. You belittled me, you called me names, you called me this, therefore you have to give me a Lamborghini. When you do it to someone else, you go, no, I'll buy you a Fuller.
A what?
A Fuller.
Fuller.
What's a follow?
Nice.
Volkswagen Beetle.
Oh. Where do people get these things?
So when I'm guilty, I always want to pay less, but when it happens to me, I want retribution. God says, no, it has to be equal. There goes verse 28. If an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox is to be stoned and its flesh not eaten. But the owner of the ox will have no further liability. However, if the ox was in a habit of goring in the past, and the owner was warned but did not confine it, so that it ended up killing a man or a woman, the ox is to be stoned, and its owner too is to be put to death. So, modern concept. You have a dog who is known for killing everything that comes near it, and you leave it in an open field, and it attacks someone, and you were warned before about this dog. You don't just get to lose the dog, you lose your life because you were the negligent owner. Responsibility. If the animal becomes a problem, restitution. If it's a continual problem, I have to lock it away. Further issues and so on. If it kills a person, the animal gets put to death. Verse 30 says, however, a ransom may be imposed on him, and the death penalty will be commuted if he pays an amount imposed. If the ox gores a son or a daughter, and the same rule applies, if the ox gores a male or female slave, its owner must give the master 12 ounces of silver, and the ox is to be stoned to death. Do you guys have a different, 12 ounces? What do you have there? 30 shekels. Here's an interesting one. How much did Judas get when he betrayed Yeshua? 30 shekels. Now you've got to ask yourself, if it's about restitution, not just betrayal, what is it got to do with this ox that gores people to death that seems to be the payment of 30 shekels? Who's the ox? Mark down in your Bible Psalm 22 or in your notes. Someone asked me this question about 3 weeks ago when I was sat stewing on it, and then the answer came up in reading. Psalm 22, we will get to that in a bit. He goes, if someone removes the cover from a cistern of digs and one fails to cover it, and the ox or the donkey falls in, the owner of the cistern must make good the loss by compensating the animal's owner. But the dead animal will be his. If one person's ox hurts another so that it dies, they are to sell the live ox and divide the revenue from the sale. They are also to divide the dead animal. But if it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring in the past and the owner did not confine it, he must pay ox for ox, but the dead animal will be his. If someone steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he is to pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 for a sheep. So why do I have to pay 5 oxen if I steal an ox and only 4 if it's a sheep?
Something about.
Yes, we pay per kilogram.
There's something about. Oh, 4 for the sheep.
What is an ox used for?
Worship.
Hmm?
Sacrifice. Oh, pulling in the field.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yoking.
So if I take one of these, can I plow my land?
Well, unless it's
And
the
Generally
only one that he
speaking.
has. You only
Generally,
have one.
yeah.
You
Generally
only have
speaking, is only the super wealthy
Yeah.
had oxen,
You
right?
only have one,
So if I was like really well off, I had 2, and then even then, what happens if they steal the one that I've got, and now all of a sudden I can't feed my family? I missed harvest. I'm confining that family to now starve because they're going to miss it completely.
So they've got one for the field and the rest to feed.
Not
They
really.
don't
Not many
really
people do. They would
There's,
have like one ox generally just to be able to plow the field, or donkey. Yeah, not many people would have. They would have generally have sheep. So sheep being a little bit more common, but remember their produce still keeps me alive. If I take it away, I have to pay back 4 times as much. Or 5 times, depending on what function it is. It's not just, I'm sorry, here I bought you another ox. I'll have 5 thanks. Oh. Let's look
And
at
the 4
that.
sheep?
4 sheep. Still part of it.
Okay.
There's an interesting parallel if you want to chase it down. When David takes Bathsheba, and is it Nathan the prophet comes up and he rebukes him. What does he say?
I rebuke you.
No, you've taken, you took the one only. You had many, but you went to somebody else and took the only
That's a fine answer, hey?
His hamsters are done.
Paraphrasing, you
Yeah.
have many wives and yet you don't take somebody's only one wife.
Right, so you took his only sheep, right?
He's dumb.
Mathematically speaking, yes.
He said you had many, but you took Uriah's, you took his only beloved, his only one. So now you have to pay back 4. How many children did David lose?
4.
So when you start going through the list of it, that retribution was paid out in fulfilling their Torah. It's an interesting sort of fulfillment thereof. Okay, but look at Psalm 22. I'm in
Funny,
Proverbs.
it's Exodus 22, Psalm 22, easy to
Yeah.
judgment. 22 is judgment, isn't it?
So many different
And
plays on
then,
those
you know,
things. Right. Psalm 22 is one of those ones we read this. Here, listen to the crucifixion in this, and this is where we'll end off. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? Do you recognize those words? Mm-hmm. Why so far from helping me, so far from my anguish cries? My God, by day I call to you, but you don't answer. Likewise at night, but I get no relief. Nevertheless, you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you rescued them. They cried to you and escaped. They trusted in you when we're not disappointed. But I am a worm, not a man. Or do I want you to go down this road?
This is the worm.
The word for worm here is a taula in Hebrew. It is a crimson worm. Have you guys ever looked into that?
You've told us. Me.
Mentioned. Go and look at the life cycle of a taula. The crimson worm in Psalm 22. Of a taula. Just you in there are a few nice parallels people do on YouTube. Yeah, it's completely gone. Is that when you go into it, when they actually will go through the life cycle phase, and you will actually see the crucifixion happen before your eyes.
Sure.
Okay, I'll leave that for you guys. You can come back to me with what you think. It says, I am a worm, not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who see me jeer at me. They sneer and shake their heads. He committed himself to Adonai, so let him rescue them. Let him set him free, if he takes such delight in him. You can hear the scoffing again of the cross, right? But you are the one who took me from the womb. You who made me trust when I was on my mother's breast. Since my birth, I have been thrown on you. You are my God from my mother's womb. Don't stay far from me, for trouble is near. There is no one to help me. Many bulls surround me. What was the penalty of 30 shekels for? An ox that gores. Something with antlers. This thing is surrounding. Wild bulls of Bashan close in on me. Where is Bashan? Upper Galilee. Who are the people that are handing him over to trial? The leaders of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. These are the wild bulls of Bashan. So remember, the penalty for something that gores someone to death, you pay 30 shekels. Who set it up? Judas Iscariot. 30 shekels of silver. They open their mouths wide against me like ravening, roaring lions. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart has become like wax. It melts inside me. My mouth is as dry as a fragment of a pot. My tongue sticks to my palate. You lay me down in the dust of death. Dogs are all around me, a pack of villains. Dogs?
Unsaved.
Gentiles. In this context. Romans. Pack of villains closes in on me like a lion at my hands and my feet, or they pierced my hands and my feet. It was the Romans who did the piercing, yes? I can count every one of my bones while they gaze at me and they gloat. They divide my garments among themselves. For my clothing they throw. They cast lots. That was the Romans again. But you, Adonai, don't stay far from me. My strength, come quickly to help me. Rescue me from the sword. My life from the power of the dogs. Save me from the lion's mouth. You have answered me from the wild bull's horns. I will proclaim your name to my kinsmen. Right there in the assembly I will praise you. You who fear Adonai, praise him. All descendants of Yaakov glorify him. All the descendants of Israel stand in awe of him. For he has not despised or abhorred the poverty of the poor. He did not hide his face, but listened to his cry. Because of you, I give thanks in the great assembly. I will fulfill my vows in the sight of those who fear him. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek Adonai will praise him. Your hearts will enjoy life forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to Adonai. All the clans of the nations will worship in your presence. For the kingdom belongs to Adonai, and he rules the nations. All who prosper on the earth will eat and worship, and all go down to dust. will kneel before him, including him who can't keep himself alive. A descendant will serve him. The next generation will be told of Adonai. They will come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, that he is the one who did it. So you see a few things there. Number one, you're going to see the Taulo, which is very interesting. Number two, you hear the words of the cross. Number three, you see the penalty for the ox goring people. It is well known for putting people to death. It is an animal that is killed before. Who is the animal? The Jewish elite in this case. Sadducees, Pharisees, and so on. And the dogs are the Romans who placated this out. So it points back for the mitzvah, and it also points forward to a prophetic of things of what's going to happen. Never thought you'd see a mitzvah in an ox goring scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Up until about 3 weeks ago, I didn't see that either.
No.
All right, so next week we'll carry on 22, 23,
Jethro.
and Jethro.
Oh man, I need to stop lately.
Money.
It's time.
Yeah, I think I'm getting
Sissy Fliss.
Kom je zo, Rachel.
Father, we just want to thank you again for this time together. We thank you for your word, Father. And as we just go and study it out, pray that you would open up our eyes to how it points to Christ, Father, and fulfillment of your text. And Father, as we do, I pray that it would also not just be head knowledge, Father, but heart knowledge as always. We thank you for your protection, for our family, for your blessings, just for being with us. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.